Okay, I think we're good to go and we are on air. So good afternoon and welcome to today's EMIS Live Lunch and Learn session. Thank you so much for taking time out to join us today. We really appreciate you being here and taking time out of your busy schedules. Okay, before we get started, I know there was a holding screen there, but just some housekeeping items to run through. So we've got a team presenting today. We're going to be kind of transitioning between, so they're the only people at the moment that won't be on mute, so we have muted all your microphones just to block out some background noise. The team that are presenting have tried to be in a quiet space, but please do forgive us if you do hear any background noise. Some of us, as you're probably aware, are working from home and various different locations. There's a Q&A panel on the screen, so we do encourage you to ask questions, please, as we go through the session. Please do pop your name on there and where you're from, and then if there are any questions we can't get through, we can pick those up and answer them afterwards, after the session. The session is being recorded today, but again, don't worry, it's not recording yourselves, it's just recording the guys that are presenting today, and we're going to share that after the session with you as well, along with a supporting pack. As I said, we have got multiple presenters today, so there's going to be some transitioning between screens. We're going to try and make those transitions as seamless as possible, but again, do bear with us as we go through. So that's the formalities done. So we need to get started. And you can see on the screen there, today's session is about online consultations. It's a session of two halves. We're going to be looking at the people, the process and the change. And then we're going to be looking at the technology that's available in your clinical system to help with processing incoming forms. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So the session is brought to you today by the people named on the screen. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues, Pete and Catherine from our training and optimisation team. Pete's going to present the second half of the session today, where he looks at EMIS Web in more detail and the technology that's available to support online consultations. Catherine is helping us in the background today, and Catherine will help answer any questions that come through on the Q&A. We're privileged to have Dr. Mike Smith here today as a guest speaker from the Malting Surgery, and Mike's going to open the session shortly with the first half of this Lunch and Learn, and he's going to be sharing his online consult experience with us. I'm Lisa Ellis. I manage the deployment and implementation team here at EMIS Health, and we are responsible for supporting practices who are implementing our online consult solution. My role today is purely to try and facilitate the flow between the session and links between presenters, and of course assist with the Q&A as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. So some of you on the call may already be, have kind of deployed online consults. Some of you may be considering it, and in either way you're committing to embracing a whole new approach to working as you implement the new technology. Now, for the next 15 to 20 minutes, Mike Smith from the Malting Surgery is going to talk you through his practice's journey. Mike's going to talk about how they embedded online consult into their working practices, best practice techniques, considerations, to support onboarding. I'm sure they'll probably talk about patient engagement initiatives and so on. So that'll be the first 15 to 20 minutes of sharing that experience. We'll then loop in with Pete, and Pete's going to pick up where the forms that are submitted by your patients actually arrive into your clinical system. So again, Pete's going to spend 15 to 20 minutes looking at how you process those forms coming into the system. So next slide, please. Okay, so I think without further ado, I'm delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Mike Smith. I had the privilege of meeting Mike in person before we all went into lockdown back in February, when my team and I were supporting his practice to implement online consult. So Mike's kindly agreed to share his experience and journey with you now. So Mike, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Lisa. This is very peculiar because I'm not used to presenting where I can't see the audience, so I could literally be presenting to anyone right now. So I am here in my practice, so I'm probably the most likely person to be interrupted by someone who doesn't know that I'm on a webinar, who might shove a prescription in front of me. So apologies if that happens. I'm actually working from a communal room in our practice called The Hub. I have got other people in the room with me, but I don't think they're really listening to me, to be honest. Can we move on to the next slide? That'd be great. Okay, so let me tell you about the Maltings. We are a large practice in the middle of St Albans city centre. In fact, the Maltings is the name of the shopping centre in St Albans, and we are slap bang in the middle of that shopping centre. And we're covering between 19 and 20,000 patients in our practice. Look, those of you who know St Albans know that actually it's very little in the way of social deprivation. There is some, as there is everywhere, but we have a particularly affluent population of patients. We have been working very hard as a practice as we've gone through a transition to as a previous partnership all retired and a new set of partners has started to try and work on ourselves and what that means to our patients. And part of that has been our online digital offering. If anyone's interested about what the Maltings values are, we have got our YouTube channel. And once again, you obviously can't click on that, but if you just Google the Maltings Surgery YouTube, that pops up as the first result. But just to sort of tell you, our 3 things that we're working on a practice over the last year or so is staff well-being, and once again, happy staff is happy patients, we all know that. Sustainability, because it's tricky being a GP practice in the current climate, and you've got to think 5, 10, 15 years ahead in terms of how much you're spending, how much income you're getting, and actually the changing landscape of general practice. But most importantly, and this is the thing that most of our GPs are experiencing, the crippling workload. And actually at the moment, it's quite puzzling for us because we usually expect a sort of a reprieve around July, but because of the COVID-19 crisis, actually we're seeing more activity than we've seen before, and we're not getting that reprieve. So managing our workload is more important than ever. And actually, this is partly why we've started with an online digital triage platform such as this, not to sort of help reduce the workload, but to almost help us manage it, make it more predictable. And when you've got a range of clinicians working across a multidisciplinary team, getting people to the right person earlier on means unnecessary work. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So our whole model as a practice is based around those 3 principles, and one key part of that is our hub, our assessment hub. And the idea of that is, and I'm sitting in the hub now, and you can see the sign behind me just to remind us that we're in the hub in case anyone forgets, is to work as a team and try and manage our workload on a daily basis. So our offer to patients is very simple. If you can either say when you phone up, you can either say, I'd like to see a particular doctor, but I'm prepared to wait a bit, or if you want your problem dealt with on the day, which most people do, whether it's urgent or non-urgent, we will attempt to do this on the day as part of our hub. Now, once again, recently, the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that we've had to change that model slightly, but before lockdown happened and we had to sort of go to a telephone triage model first, actually that was working quite well. So what that means is you phone up and our receptionists will be trained. In fact, we call them patient care advisors, will be trained to say, actually, if you, how can I help you? Do you mind speaking to do you want to speak to any particular doctor? Their next appointment, it could be 2 weeks. But if they don't care who they speak to, which actually a big proportion of our patients don't, they just want their problem dealt with, they will be dealt with by the assessment hub. One of the unintended consequences of this was that our phone lines became slightly more popular, which is why we needed another access for people to get information, route of access for people to get information to us. Now, the hub has been very good for us because one of the big things is that it's good for team morale, because as a GP, you can be quite lonely. You're sitting in your room and you might not speak to another colleague for the whole day if you have a bad day. But what we've found is that I'm in a room here, and there can be up to 6, 7 people. We've always had to reduce that because of social distancing recently. But 6 or 7 people can be in here, all discussing cases in real time. So if somebody wants a bit of clinical assistance, if someone knows a patient, there's a multidisciplinary team approach to it. And it's intense, but it's predictable. So we know that if you're on the hub from 8 till 1, it's going to be pretty hard. It's going to be pretty intense. But actually, we know that all of that workload will be dealt with in one place. And if we have, nothing gets missed. And what I mean by that is that if there's a paramedic on the phone on attendance with a patient, they can phone up and speak to someone immediately, whereas traditionally in some practices, it may take a while to get hold of a GP. If there's a red flag radiology report which needs actioning immediately, someone is there to deal with it immediately. If there's a child protection or an adult safeguarding thing that happens, it can be dealt with every day by that team. And actually, we are evolving it. It is a work in progress. Next slide, please. So look, just to give you an idea of what the hub sees. So I put these 2 pictures up and they look quite bizarre, I'm quite sure. So our practice, I have dealt with everything. So I remember when I arrived in St Albans, one of the first one of the first queries I got was a lady who was going on safari in Africa. And her query was, and she'd had an appointment for this, her son was allergic to horses, and she wanted to know whether he'd be allergic to zebras when they went on this very posh safari. So once again, that doesn't really need a doctor traditional 10-minute, 15-minute appointment. It can be dealt with in a very different way compared to one patient I saw who was an elderly guy who had sudden onset of back pain with enough red flags that I had to blue light him to hospital for metastatic spinal cord compression. Now, once again, I'm just showing you the range of things. And the problem is that trying to sort of deal with that in terms of what's acute, what's not acute, what's a red flag, what's not, requires several degrees of subtlety, experience, but also several tools as well. So, whatever we did in terms of an online digital triage platform, it was important that there was that ability built into it. Next slide, please. So why did we need one? Next slide, please. This is much easier if I pressed it, wouldn't it? But here we go. So we had a large number of non-clinical queries. And the problem is, and if you advance to the next slide, you'll see something appear. They didn't look like it at first. So what I mean by that is that if people said, I want a sick note, I want a note, by the way, those of you who don't know what GANFID is, it's get a note from your doctor. But those people who don't know what, who do this will know that actually, when they have a sick note, it might be presenting as something very different of, my back pain's no better, and they'll give you a long explanation. At the end of a 10-minute telephone call, they'll go, so what I really need is a sick note, doctor. And actually, if there was a way of just cutting to the quick and finding out what the actual issue was, we could also issue sick notes. The amount of times that people phone up for sick notes when actually they can self-certificate is also very big as well. So the ability to get people the advice quickly for that is also very invaluable to us. Letters and notes from the doctor. Once again, I'm sure everyone who works in general practice knows that we can be swamped with that. People asking for, is it time for my annual blood test? People asking for, where's my referral in my hospital? And actually, a lot of people phone up just wanting to know how to navigate a very complex health and social care system. So actually, to have the ability to be able to sort of fish those out without needing to take a doctor's appointment has been invaluable to us. Can I have the next slide, please? So once again, I don't want to sort of go into any detail on this, but these are the type of things that we were getting people who we were redirecting as self-care. And I went through this prior to our implementation of our online platform. And, we still, and I'm sure some practices still see this quite a lot, people asking for queries on very common things that actually a pharmacist or even a self-care leaflet or indeed, someone who wasn't a doctor, maybe quite an experienced nurse or paramedic can give advice on. But most of this stuff, I think you'll agree, a well-trained pharmacist could give advice on. And actually the ability to be able to direct that without the need to touch the system, block the phone lines, take a clinician's time, for those who really do need our time, is actually very important to us. Can I have the next slide, please? So other reasons that we needed a platform is, and I keep on going back to this, is that our phone lines, it doesn't, it's a real tricky thing for us, because the psychology of patients, understandably, is to phone at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we've got 20,000 patients, and they don't all, thank God, all don't try and phone at the same time. But if you look at the graph of when the calls come in, actually, the hidden secret for us is if you phone at 12 midday, you'll probably get through straight away. If you phone at 8 a.m., you won't get through straight away. And actually, we've got to have the ability for people to realise that the traditional way of getting on the phone and waiting for someone to pick up is not needed anymore. And indeed, what we've got is an ability for patients to submit inquiries at the weekend that we can then pick up on the Monday if they're non-urgent. The other thing is that the thing that's always worried us is that if there's patients with more severe symptoms, and one of the reasons we didn't encourage patients to email with symptoms was sometimes you might miss a red flag. And our fear was always, if someone emailed us on a weekend and they had several worrying symptoms, actually the problem would be, what would we miss something by not dealing with that by Monday afternoon? But luckily, there's things in place with this platform that stop that happening. The other thing that obviously has been a massive impact from us is COVID-19. So actually, I mean, I'm sure all of you, I could do a whole half an hour talk on how we've had to respond to COVID-19, but we've had to have a response to that. And the other thing is that we are getting an increase in demand. Patients are contacting their GP practice more for a wide variety of things. And there's no exception for this. We've seen even during COVID, people were continuing. There was about 3 weeks when they didn't, but the demand was going up. So as a result, we had to really make sure that we were able to meet that demand in a way that was predictable. And I think that's the key thing here, is that if we're able to see what's coming in, it keeps it very predictable. Can I have the next slide, please? So look, this is our model now. It's very easy, and I've told you about our hub. So what happens now is that if a patient submits an online consult, sometimes it's dealt with online. So what I mean by that is they might click something like sore throat, conjunctivitis, and it will give them some really sound advice of how to deal with that query. Sometimes it will lead them to submitting a form online, which means that as a result, that then gets sent to, and I'm not going to go into what Peter's going to talk to you about, but it goes into our EMIS platform, which means that we can it's an admin query, which can be dealt with by our administrative team, or it can be dealt with by the clinical team as a clinical query. And if it's a clinical query, it gets added to a workflow that our hub, which you've started to hear in the background now, deal with a load of problems, and apologies for that. This is our only Windows 10 PC in the practice, which is another issue with IT, but that's not EMIS or Egton's fault. But we attempt to deal with all online queries by 12 midday the next working day. So that means that if you would submit it on a Monday, it will get dealt with by 12 midday on the Tuesday. Over the weekend is the next working day. So as a result, we think that this is safe, because not only does this system allow us to filter out the red flags, but once their patient if there are some patients who can't afford to wait more than a day or two. So we think this is a good model for us, and it's worked really well from us since its implementation in February. Next slide, please. Okay, so where are we now? Look, this has been a slow growth, and with anything you implement for patients, it takes them a while to get used to it, to use it, and to make it sort of to make it as part of their normal practice. But we're starting to, and this is growing month by month, but from the month of June, because I haven't got the data for July yet, we were getting around 450 interactions with the platform a month. And of those 450, only 25% led to an online form being submitted that we had to deal with. An impressive 20% actually didn't touch the practice, and they followed the link that was part of the online platform. And one thing that I found really surprising is that of those 450, 45 of them hit a red flag or a hard stop, which meant they were redirected to call NHS 111 immediately, or call the practice immediately for immediate help. The other thing I found really interesting was just the large number of desktop users. I just assumed that that most people would be doing it from their mobile or tablet, but as you can see, more than half of people were actually doing this from a desktop. I didn't realize anyone had a desktop anymore, but once again, that's just an interesting thing. Can I have the next slide, please? So look, this is just an idea of the days of the week, and don't worry too much about the numbers on the top. But as you can see, most people access it on a Monday, and fewer people access it at the weekend, and that just shows patient behaviour and psychology. And what the thing that I find puzzling about that is there's just this obsession with 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, and even if it's the phone lines or an online consult, people still look at it as, oh, I've got to get there Monday, but all these people on the Monday, had they submitted their form on the Sunday, they would have been dealt with at the same time. All the people on the Saturday, had they submitted it, sorry, on the Monday, had they done it on the Saturday or the Friday, it would have been dealt with by lunchtime on the Monday. So it's just very odd, patient psychology, and we're trying to educate them. We're trying to get them to spread out their calls, spread out their online. But this reflects our phone line use as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is the age profile of the people using it. As you can see, the majority of people are in that sort of middle bump. Don't worry, there's not 0 to 9-year-olds using the online platform. That's who they were submitting. That was obviously their parents doing it for. But I think that one of the myths here is that and it was quite funny actually. One of my paramedics, she's in her 20s. She said, "Well, I can't believe the amount of old people using it." And I went, "What do you mean?" She went, "Old, over the age of 50." And I looked at her and went, that's not old, but never mind. That's a different story altogether. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking at what people are using this for, and once again, this surprised us. First of all, it's medication requests. Now, this is very different from patient access, where they ask for a prescription. This is something that's not on their usual prescription. They can't do through patient access, and they're saying, "Hey, doc, back in 1994, I was once prescribed this cream for X. Can I have some more of it?" And that we've created that one ourselves actually, and that's our most popular submission. And that's the other thing about this platform, is it does allow you to write your own ones as well, which I found invaluable. General health query was our second most common one. As you can understand, that was basically people with unexplained symptoms, strange symptoms, which actually helped us really hone in on the problem once they'd submitted the information to it. As you can see, a load of admin stuff, a load of medical reports and letters. That includes sick notes, by the way. And women's health and joint muscle and joint problems are also our next thing. Can I have the next slide, please? The thing about this is that, look, it's a work in progress, and there is much work to do on this. And this isn't just an Eggston problem. This is a platform problem amongst all the platforms, is that there is work to do. But we've already noticed some benefits here. So the best one is that the phone lines have been eased, and that has been a real palpable difference for us, because our phones were a real pressure, and that's been reflected in our patient survey. So whereas we were terrible for phone access, we're now just bad at phone access. So that's a step in the right direction, and as more people use this, that will improve. There has definitely been some impact on workload, a slight decrease only, and I think that's the other thing, is to manage expectations. This is not going to reduce workload in any way that you're going to go, "Oh, that's great, we can." And with all these platforms, and once again, there's a leading one that one of my friends is using from another provider. What we've all reflected on is that we can't control the workload. That is there. But what this has enabled us to do is basically think about who does that workload and when we do it. Because actually, when it's all dumped in one time with a bunch of doctors to do, it's less desirable than if it's spread over the course of a week with doctors, nurses, pharmacists, paramedics, the whole multidisciplinary team. We've got a physio, and as a result, we think that we're dealing with problems with the right person earlier. And actually, it has helped in terms of how the workload feels. It feels less and intense. Patient experience has been very good with this so far. Patients are obviously wanting the impossible. They're saying, "Can you do this? Can you do this?" But like I said, I think it's a work in progress. We are getting more hits on our website, which is actually where a lot of people access this platform. But obviously, I think that's going to be spoken about later. And we've actually managed to pick up some pathology during the COVID-19 crisis. And the big thing about that is that when you think about it, a lot of people are experiencing people having delayed presentations with things because they were scared to go to their GP, they were scared to go to their hospitals. And we're now picking up people with, stuff that they thought was innocuous that actually turned out to be something that was more than we thought. And we've picked up some serious pathology thanks to this platform during the COVID-19 crisis and how people access healthcare. And I really think that is one of the big positive things to me. And I think that that's just something that we're waiting to explore. Can I have the next slide, please? So look, I'm going to be honest, no one likes to come to a presentation and tell everyone that their baby's ugly. Luckily, this isn't my baby, so I can be very open and honest about it. Look, I'm not going to lie, it's not perfect, okay? But none of them are, yeah? None of them are perfect. And the reason we like this is that I am in conversation with the team, and I've got to say the team have been really responsive and they have listened to us, and they're now looking to see how they can make this stuff less clunky, and that is the main problem. It is clunky, and it's mainly perhaps my side than the patient's side. And to be honest, if it has to be clunky, I'd rather it be from my side than the patient's side. One thing, and I don't think Egerton can do anything about this, but this just annoys me, is when someone does an online consult request and then they phone up the practice and book an appointment that way. So it's really annoying when you have two people on the same list, but I don't think there's a lot we can do about that. We just have to be alert. I think, one thing that we all know, and I've managed to go this whole presentation without mentioning Accurix, but I think all GPs and all GP practices and staff will realise that Accurix has been a game changer for us, really. I think what I would like from this is the ability to attach a photograph or a document, because that would really change my practice. Because what we have to do sometimes with the online consult is then read it and then send them an Accurix to be able to reply back with a photograph or a document. Once again, I know that Egerton are working on this, and that will be a game changer. The other thing, which is just a technical thing, and I'm sure you're going to hear about this later, when you get the report, it's a PDF over 2 pages. It'd be so nice if it was over 1 page, but that's just my personal gripe. Look, I think that the future of this is very exciting, and I think that what we need to do is work on how this is going to be more intuitive. How an AI I don't want to use, because I think it's more Bayesian theory than it is AI. But I just think that this is a product in development. I'm very excited to see how it's going. The only thing also, I think if you are interested in data like me, I think that it's a bit. It doesn't give you reports of how many you've submitted and what they're submitting that easily. I have got access to that data, and thanks to the efforts of Egerton recently, that has been really forthcoming. But it's just something that I wanted to sort of see going forward, and I managed to mention Accurix only twice in that bit of the presentation, so I'm very happy. Next slide, please. So what's next for us? Look, I think that what's clear is that we're going to continue working with Egerton, EMIS Health, and everyone about how we're going to develop. I'm a big fan. I've been with this organisation in terms of using their products for 20 years nearly, and they've always been really responsive. And with this product, the team who are speaking to you today are no different. They really do listen to your concerns, and they're able to sort of really realise what GPs want and need, and I really respect that. And it's the inflexibility of other platforms that put me off them. And I'm not a salesman. I'm not getting paid by EMIS to say this. I'm not on their payroll. But I think that whereas I've worked with other platforms like this, when you say, "Can you do this?" they say, "Oh, you don't need that. You don't need that." And I go, "Well, I think I do need that. I'm using it." And EMIS and Egerton have never said that to us, and they've always been keen to sort of say, "Look, we think we can work on that." Sometimes they go, "I don't think that's possible," and then you appreciate the honesty. Next for us is that we need to campaign to increase further use, and that's been difficult during the COVID-19 crisis, because we've been trying to educate them about COVID-19 and how we're changing as a practice. So actually, to sort of bombard them with online solutions, we've had to time it well. But we are working on a video of how patients can use it. Once again, go to our YouTube channel to see our 2 videos that we've made this year and to give you an idea of how they're going to look. We are working on more personalised templates specific to the maltings. And once again, one of the benefits of this platform is you can make your own templates as well. Like I said, that slide I showed you earlier, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we need to think about spreading that sort of use throughout the week so that there's not that Monday morning impact. And actually, I do think, although my paramedic who said, "All those old people over the age of 50, oh, I've never been so insulted." Actually, I think that we do need to sort of push the curve towards people, particularly in their 70s and 80s, who we've been doing video consults with on smartphones and gadgets and tablets. So I know they've got the tech, but it's just we need to encourage them to use it more, because it is quite intuitive and quite straightforward. Next slide. I think that's the last one. Thank you so much for listening.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Mike. It was extremely insightful. I'm sure everyone on the call today has been able to take some inspiration and some ideas and even reassurances from what you've just shared. And I think what you've demonstrated there is that there's a lot to think about, isn't there? There's a lot going on. You know, it's the work that you've done, the considerations you've done to set up that team and that resource within the practice. I've certainly jotted down some key things there that I've taken from that. You know, some of the statistics you've shared were fantastic, and I particularly liked the point you made about not allowing patients to use emails to contact you because of the risk element. And obviously online consult brings with it more structured, standard, clinically authored templates with algorithms in there that support that. So there's some great messages in there, so we really appreciate it. There's some questions come through, Mike, and I think it's probably a good point now before we move over to Pete to answer some of those if we can, if I can call those out to you. And we'll pick a couple out that have been shared. So if I just find them and read them out. So Michelle at Parkside Group Practice says, how long have you been using online consult at the practice?
So not long, and actually, I think it was February that we rolled out, and we were really keen to roll out quickly. So it was a bit of a rushed rollout, and that was our fault, not anyone else's. It's just that I'm impatient. So February, and once again, if you look at the usage, it's just done. You know, it's been a steady increase in usage across that time. So yeah, February is the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of anonymous ones. We'll do maybe 3. If there's any more, we'll see if we can wrap them up at the end, because I don't want to interfere too much with Pete's bits. So let's have a quick look. Bear with me while I read these out. Dr. Lorna Donaldson, GP5 in Scotland. We're looking at implementing online consult shortly, reviewing a lot of the forms. A number of the symptoms won't allow a form to be submitted, brackets, worsening diabetes or breathless with ankle swelling. Our reception are a bit worried that patients will learn to say, I can't submit a form to get through urgently. Have you found a lot of patients' queries can't submit a form, or do most people use the generic form and come through with everything?
So it's a bit. So we do have a lot of people coming through on the generic form with a range of conditions. Actually, those ones don't tend to be particularly taxing, if I'm honest. They tend to be stuff where they're just asking a how-to question that they haven't really negotiated the site. And what's really odd is sometimes you'll see that they have access the information leaflet that it's put them through to, but they'll just want a doctor to make sure that's the right advice, even though that's the advice that was being written by doctors. So we, in terms of the other, what I'd say to you, Lorna, is that when we have a problem that we're seeing a lot of people presenting with, you know, because every practice is different. I've written my own forms, and that's one of the benefits of this, is that I've written my own forms that you can then customize for your practice. So you'll see on the Malting site, there are some on there. I think there's only 4 that I've done, because actually that's all we've needed so far. But I've got more in the pipeline that are specific to us. And that's what I would suggest that you're getting. So if you are getting a lot of patients with that, we've not found patients gaming the system in any way, because actually if you've got a good system of how those forms are met, then actually they can, you know, that doesn't happen. And what we're finding actually is that patients realize if they use the forms correctly, their problems often get dealt with faster and better than had they tried to game the system and get access another route. We are finding that slowly but surely. Work in progress.
Okay, thanks, Mike. There are a few other questions on there, folks, but what we'll do, we'll see if we can wrap those up at the end, because I don't want Pete's bit to get chopped off. So that's great, Mike. Thank you for that. So we're going to move on to Pete next. Before we do that, and I mentioned earlier that Pete's going to talk about the technology in the clinical system that then supports how you manage the forms when they arrive at your practice. If we could just go to the next slide first, please. I think it's worth just reminding ourselves before we move on to Pete of where the kind of technological journey starts. So as Mike's talked about there, online consult is a web-based platform. It's comprises a comprehensive suite of self-help information for patients, articles, videos, and signposting to relevant services. It should reduce the need for patients to call or visit the practice, because the idea is that they're going to self-help and or submit an online form. So it's really about patient empowerment, encouraging patients to always go to your digital front door first and foremost, for them to take responsibility really for their own health and well-being. So as part of your patient engagement initiatives, when you're onboarding the solution, that digital first approach is really key. And you'll direct patients to online consult via one of two methods. So the first one could be through your website, which is what we're showing on the slide at the moment. And this is where this journey begins. And if we could just go to the next slide, please, Liz. Brilliant. And this is through patient access. So the two methods shown is the route in. This is the bit that you should be promoting to your patients. And of course, they can self-help through these methods and submit a form. So once it arrives in your clinical system, that's the trigger, isn't it? That's probably the first you as a practice are seeing of this. And you need to then think about how you're going to process it. So if we can move to the next slide. This is where I hand over to Pete. So Pete's going to take you on that journey from when the online consultation form arrives with you. And hopefully Pete's going to demonstrate the functionality in your clinical system and talk through some pathways or mechanisms of streamlining your approach and the dissemination of workload around the practice in the most efficient way. So Pete, over to you, please.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, so we're going to look at now the idea of how to file the reports. So as you should see now, you should be able to see my version of EMIS Web. So when the files do come in, they will come into what's known as Workflow Manager. As Lisa was saying, there is two directive ways in for the forms to be completed. So one is via your website and the other is via patient access. So depending which form they use would depend which inbox they would come into directly to start with. So what we're going to look at first is forms that are submitted via a website or the web page. The reason for this is because the information that comes from the form can't actually track the patient correctly into EMIS Web. So what they would do is when they come in, they will come into the unmatched section of EMIS Web in document management. So they will come into this form here. The reason for that is because it can't match to the patient directly in the system. So what we have to do there at that point is then match the patient. So from this point, I prefer to double click on the document. So I go into the unmatched on the left hand side, and then I double click on the document. The reason I double click on it is then it opens up the document nice and big so you can actually see the document. As Mike mentioned before, with the PDF, it comes onto more than one page depending on the size of the actual form that is submitted. So as you scroll through the forms, you can see this, and it gives you the information on the form as guided. And then at the bottom of the page, you can see, in this case, there is actually 3 pages. So this is what you need to be aware of, just to make sure you're not missing any information on the form, and you can go through that information. But what we need to do is we then need to match that to the patient to make sure we are attaching it to the correct patient. So on the first page of the PDF, you can see there's the patient's details on the form. What we're going to do then is use the option at the top to then find the patient to match that to. So once we click find patient, what you can do is then drag the box over so you can still see the full patient information on the form. In this case, I'm going to use the date of birth to search for. And as you can see, I just pop in the date of birth as such and then press enter. And it's giving me the patient information. And again, you can then check the address is correct and matches that information on the form. So we're happy that's that patient. And then we're just going to click OK to that. At this point with this form, we could then move on. So if this was a form that was just say like a test request form and it was an admin member of staff dealing with this, they could then move on and actually see, go on to then view the patient's test request to see if there's any test requests due. And then they could contact the patient at that point and deal with the form themselves at this point. Once they've actually done that, they can then file this document away. To do this, what they would do is then just go into the add a document type and then search to code it. So if you type in online, you can see eventually it then gives you down outcomes of the patients. So this one, what you could do is we're just going to select online triage encounter. For this one, what we would do is then telephone the patient to say that then the bloods have come in. So from here, because we've got the document open, we can actually then move across using the options at the top onto the patient's record. So you can see here, we can then view and we can go into investigations and we can see the patient's had any bloods done, and then they can contact the patient to say that the bloods have been returned. With this, then we can then just click on the workflow task at the top to go back to the document. From here, with this document, then we're just going to file the document. So at this point, all we need to do is then complete the task. That then files that onto the patient record. Moving on to this one, as a different form, so say like this form then needs to go onto a GP to view or onto a nurse to review. What we can do is once we actually find the patient, so again, we can then just do that, but I'm just going to select the first patient on the list. Down at the bottom here, what we can do is we can create a filing task. So if we click to create the filing task, we can then send that to a particular user. So we can then forward this form onto the doctor, onto the nurse, depending on what form it is. So if it was an asthma review form or an asthma query form, that could go to the nurse because they do the asthma reviews and so on and so forth. So they can actually view that form. In this case, I'm just going to select myself, so then it then pops into the file that I can actually view. And again, at that point, what we would do is then complete the task. The reason we complete the task is then it moves it out of the unfiled. And as we do that, just missed that bit. So again, I'm just going to put in online encounter. And then, like I say, we're then going to complete the task. What will happen then is you can actually now see that the file has moved into the awaiting filing section, and then it's actually assigned to that person. So then they can go into the awaiting filing and then they can work on that form from there. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just open that form again by double clicking it. So at this point, maybe it's tired and weakness. Once I've read through the form, it might be at that point that the doctor or the nurse decides that they may need to call the patient in. So they may need to actually see the patient in person or book a telephone call. So what they could do, they can actually then send a task to a member of the reception team. So at the top of the form, they can add the option to then create a task. And then you can see then you've got an option to then book an appointment. And then that's going to go to that particular team. And then you can say, to see the doctor. And then you can then forward that task on. Once you've actually sent that task, you can then complete the file of this. So you can just complete the task, and then that's filed to the patient's record. So then that shows you how quickly that form can be done. And then the reception team or the admin team will then book that patient in for an appointment to actually see the doctor. What I'm going to do now is just come, and that's how you would deal with unmatched patients. So this is coming down the line basically from the web page. So you would then have to match the patient first to be able to then proceed. The other direction that these forms come in is directly from patient access. So once the form's being submitted by patient access, straight to that patient because that patient is signed into patient access. So we can actually link that information together. And when that happens, the forms come into a different place, which is known as online triage. So when you're actually active with this, these forms would then come directly into online triage. As you can see here, I've got just at the top of them, I've actually marked these ones as urgent, just so I can actually find these easier to work with. So then they're easier to process. So as you can see on the actual form, on the description, it actually gives you a document title as what it comes in as. So as the first one here, you can see this is patient feedback from the practice. So this can then just be dealt with by an admin member of staff, or it can be sent on to the manager to be seen. So with this, what we would do, again, we can double click on the form and then it opens the form up for us. So if we don't need to do anything with this form and it's nice and easy form just because it's patient feedback, we can then just complete the task and that will file that to the patient's record. Maybe what we want to do is then forward that on to our manager or the practice manager just to see how much feedback we're getting, see what kind of feedback is. From that point, what we can do is use this option to match the user. So what this will do is then move that task onto that actual patient's user's inbox. So when we match the user, we can then select who we want to send it to. So again, I am just going to select myself and then we click OK. And what this will do is then actually put that in their own individual inbox within online triage within document management. As you can see at the moment, it still actually shows here because we're actually looking at this as my view, but it's actually been assigned to me, so it's still there. If I'd assigned it to somebody else, what we could do is then actually move that on. At this point, maybe the practice manager doesn't want to view this, so maybe they want to send it on to their assistant or someone like that. Now we've got the option to actually change the owner because we've matched it to a particular person. So at the top, what we can do is then change the owner. And from here, we can then select people in the teams. So I'm just then going to select someone maybe in the admin team. So I can pick somebody here. So this time what I'm going to do is, because Catherine's on our list, I'm just going to send it over to Catherine. So what we'll notice, I've now lost that task and that's now sitting in Catherine's inbox for her to view. So it's now separate so she can see that it's a separate task. The next one going along, again, you can see the actual content is contact your doctor about your asthma. So again, if you double click on the form, you can open this up and maybe depending on your practice and who deals with these, this could actually then go to a nurse. So you could forward this on to a nurse to then view that form. So again, what I would advise is then we then match the user at the top and then pick a nurse. So as this case, we're going to send it to the nurses team. So then that means every nurse can see that and they can actually then pick up that form. So it's not necessarily just one nurse. They can then just share that between the two of them, or whoever picks that task up first within the nurses team can then deal with that task. As you can see, because I've kept this task actually open, we've then moved on to the next form. So this is another reason why it's good to actually double click on the form and have that form open. So if someone's actually triaging these forms first and then directing them off to different people, they can just work their way down the list as they're going along, which makes it a lot quicker and a lot easier to work with. So as you can see, this is a test request form. So again, at this point, maybe this, if it's an admin member of staff, they could actually deal with this task there and then and don't have to forward that on to anybody. So again, from here, they can then just view quickly. They can either go onto the patient's problems to have a look at the patient's problem screen and the investigations to see if those reports have actually come in. And then it might be a case of then just a quick phone call to the patient to say that, yeah, your reports are in, but then there's no need to worry. There's no action taken with these lab results. And at that point, once they've actually done that, they can then complete that task. So again, it's nice and easy, depending on the form. So again, what we would do is complete the task. And then we're on to the next form. So this is a cough and cold and flu. So maybe at this point, this would then go to the doctor. So as you can see, it's 2 pages. As you can see, they believe that they've had this symptom for over 3 weeks. So this is quite an ongoing problem. It's not just a, like a little tickle in this case. So this might need to be seen by the doctor. Again, from here at the top, you can then add that task to then book them in to see the doctor. Other things is you can maybe advise them to go on and ask them to maybe speak to the pharmacist. Like Mike was saying, when the forms come in, they might actually be at a point where a pharmacist could actually deal with this. So again, it could be just a task sent to the receptionist asking to go to the pharmacist and just advise them to do that. So you're not then taking up the time for a doctor's appointment. You're then forwarding them on to different information. Again, like you say, you can just say with this one, it's going to be a patient note because we don't actually want anything to do with them. and we're going to select who we want to send it to. So I'm just going to send it to myself. And then as you can see, I'm just putting in a little note. You can then see, I'm just going to make that quick, nice and easy. Then we just need to make sure that they then go see the pharmacist for advice. And then obviously from that point, then we can then complete the task. What you can do is you can obviously add particular read codes as well. So if it is an actual problem and it's never been diagnosed, so if it was an asthma, you can then actually then pick up the form and you can actually add that as a form and you can add that code. So you can do a lot from these forms. You can actually go in and add information. So maybe they don't have asthma. So you can actually then, once you're looking at the form, you might determine that they actually suffer from asthma. So you can actually record that as a problem from the form. And then okay that, so you can see it's actually recording it as a problem. It might just be a review, so they might have given you that information as a review for their asthma. You can then change it as an active problem, or you can mark it as a review. This is actually picking up that the patient is marked as asthma, so it's now actually being marked as a review. And then, like you say, you can okay that and then complete the task again. And that's the best way to navigate around the system, and that's some of the ways of actually filing and dealing with those reports. So that's the end of my presentation, and I hope that's been very helpful.
That's great. Thank you, Pete. I think it's really good to see there just a few examples of how you can optimize the tools that are available in the clinical system to introduce efficiencies. And I'm sure that there are other things in there as well, like templates that you can have that can help with standard coding and so on. So just before we move to questions and wrap up the session, I think I just want to summarize at that point what we've looked at today. So Mike has given us a really invaluable insight into the kind of real life journey of a practice onboarding online consult. I think the importance of the planning, the preparation, thinking about people, resources and skills. As Mike said, you know, they're quite lucky at their practice that they've got the hub and they've got the resources available to do that. Not every practice has that same resource available or skill set. So I guess the point is that, you know, implementing online consult isn't just about putting the technology in there. It's about some real time investment, thinking about how you're going to manage it, how it's going to change your day-to-day working processes. So there is a time commitment, you know, having champions. You know, Mike is a true advocate, as he said, for EMIS and our solutions, but obviously believes in this solution and has got a vision for what it can achieve and the efficiencies it can introduce. So having champions in your practice who can really steer it and be advocates is fantastic. When you then fuse that together with the technology, you know, you can't have one without the other. So that fusion is so powerful to be able to link the two together. So I guess the people, the process and the technology can really revolutionize the way that you all work. So I think there are a few more questions in here that we can, and I think they're for Mike. I don't know if you've got any questions on your bit, Pete. Let's have a quick look. We've got an anonymous one, Mike. It's for yourself. It just says, are you using this through patient access, and has it helped increase your numbers for online services?
So the short answer is yes, it has. You know, people are now, our answer message when people phone up the practice, we say, welcome to the Malting surgery, blah, blah, it's yours truly doing it. And I say, look, to save time, to avoid a wait, why don't you go through patient access? And we're seeing that single intervention just boosted people's use of patient access and online consult. One thing I just want to say, just on Pete's presentation, because I'm just listening to it there, and I think that the thing to stress there is you don't have to do it that way. We don't do it that way in our practice. That is one way of doing it. So I'm so allergic to tasks on EMIS. If we did it that way, my task would be 40 by the end of the day. So the way we do it is that we don't send a task to the reception to say, make an appointment. If I read the form, and I'm on the hub, I'm on the team dealing with the forms, which is part of the hub, I will phone up the patient there and there. I'll just phone them and make the intervention there. Because sending a task that then goes to me to do the appointment. It just wastes time for us. The other intervention, just in terms of sending a task to go to pharmacy, I will just send them a text message, and it's a bit more powerful coming from a doctor saying, I've read your form, I think there's nothing to worry about here. Why don't you go to a pharmacist? They're more likely to comply with that than they are if a receptionist says, we've looked at your form, go to a pharmacy, and some of the language is not used. And actually sending a text takes all of 30 seconds. And I've got templates for those texts that say, I've looked at your problem, and it looks like it's really personal coming from me. So I just wanted to sort of say that point.
No, and I agree, Mike, and I don't think there is a one size fits all. And I know my team, when we're onboarding practices, we get a lot of people saying, what should we do and how should we do it? And it's really difficult because it is different depending, again, on the practice and the resources and the skill set and the setup. You know, some practices implement an admin team who do the triage initially, so they might then use tasks to assign things. But you're quite right. But I think the key message is understanding what tools and resources you've got available, both in your systems and your people, and then making sure you try them. And if one thing tries, if it fails and it doesn't work, try something else. So it's not necessarily going to be an overnight thing, and not being fearful of that. Sometimes you have to try things, and sometimes if it doesn't work, it's better because you'll try harder to do something different that might be more efficient. So I think that's a really strong message, and it's good to hear how you're doing it, Mike. And I think we get a lot of practices wanting to speak to other practices, and again, anybody listening on the call, I would encourage that. If you're in a PCN or just in your local, within your CCG, talk to one another, share experiences, set up a user group around online consult, make it an agenda item.
And Lisa, that's a really good point. This is a really good solution for PCNs. So with PCNs, you typically have one bigger practice and some smaller ones. There's lots of variations, but that's usually where it is. And actually, it makes sense for just one place for the forms to go and get triaged. And if there is a smaller practice that needs support with that, we're looking to that in our PCN to say, do we deal with it all in one place? So I think the opportunity for PCNs is really a big one going forward. Brilliant.
Look, I'm just conscious of time, everyone, and there's some questions coming in. We might have time for one more, and then we'll round things up. So we've got a question again. It's one for you, Mike, really, saying our GPs have been reluctant to go down this route because they think it's another place to look, in addition to emails and online portals and access requests, lab reports, document. Have your GPs been cooperative, and how have you kind of overcome that, I guess, if they haven't been?
So the thing is, this is not the same as EMIS and patient access messaging. So patient access messaging was a thing that really upset a lot of our GPs, and we had to stop it straight away because all of a sudden it was just another route for patients to be able to access the practice and create workload. And emails was the same thing because they would just get forwarded onto someone. The thing about this is about a filter that we can put there, and actually, as I've showed you in that diagram, a lot of people are filtered off to self-care, more than I thought, more than I thought was possible. A few of them are filtered off to say, look, this is actually a bit more serious, you should probably phone someone. And then a big chunk of them are obviously submitting a form. And of those forms, a big chunk of them are straight to admin. And of the ones that are left, we can then divide them. So actually, strangely, in some perverse way, it means less rubbish is coming to the GP's way. And actually, I think that's one of the selling points here. To be honest, so I think that the way forward is to tell your GPs, actually, this is a way of saving you those interactions, and tell them that this isn't just a way of them getting a cheeky email to their practice, which some people are fearful of.
That's great, thanks, Matt. Right, folks, it's 1 o'clock on the dot. So I think I just need to wrap the session up and say, thank you once again, everyone that's joined, for your time today. We hope you found the session insightful. I'd like to say thank you again to Mike and Pete for presenting, and our colleagues in the background as well, Catherine and Heather and Liz, for facilitating behind the scenes. Please do look out for follow-up emails. If there's any questions we've not answered, we'll put them into some kind of FAQ, Q&A, and get responses shared. We'll also be sharing the recording of today's session. And of course, if you need any help or guidance or more information on the topic, please do reach out to us via your account directors, who'll be more than happy to help. So yes, I think that concludes the session. Thank you once again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and bye for now.